Good morning, everybody. We're going to be seeing you file in digitally over Zoom. Thank you very much for joining us today. Before we get started, to mention that this event is being recorded and the recording will be available and circulated, just for you to bear in mind. I think that's probably most of the waiting room through, so let's kick off. Welcome. Today sees us unveil our kind of official launch of the 2024 Times Top 50 Employers for Gender Equality. We're delighted you've come to join us. My name's Charlotte Woodworth. I'm the Gender Equality Campaigns Director here at Business in the Community, and I'm going to be chairing the session. I'm joined by my colleague Ellie Jefford, who you can see on screen there, one of our advisors, and the two of us will be double heading us through this session. And then we're also very pleased to have a speaker from a previous applicant who's going to share their experience of applying before. So happy new year to you too. Thank you for whoever's put that. Welcome to 2024. Let's get started. So we're going to kick off with just a run through the agenda. I'm going to begin this session by just talking a little bit about the awards in a general context way, and in particular situating them as part of the wider gender equality campaign here at BITC. Then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ellie, who's going to talk about the process of applying, the detail, a little bit more granular around the specifics. Then there'll be time for any questions from the floor. Just pop them in the chat. Either myself or Ellie will seek to answer them. We've also got a number of colleagues on the call who will engage in kind of dialogue in the chat. After that, as I mentioned, we're delighted to welcome Laura Price from Shell, one of our previous successful applicants, who's going to join me in a conversation exploring a bit about the why and the how of Shell's approach to Times Top 50, which we hope will be very useful for others considering applying. Again, there'll be space for any follow-up Q&A, and then we will be coming to a close, and we expect to finish just ahead of 12. So before we kind of get started, it's really helpful for us to have a sense of who's in the room. We had a lot of interest in this event, but we're keen to understand how many of you are familiar with the awards. So a poll should be popping up on your screen to ask, have you applied for the Times Top 50 Employers for Gender Equality before? If you could let us know, it helps us kind of pitch what we're sharing and situating. As you may be aware, we've had year-on-year record applications, and we're expecting that again this year, fingers crossed. So we're keen to see how many newbies we've got in the room. How are we doing, Jess? Jess is our digital whiz who's here with us today, making sure that things run smoothly.
Just letting a few more come in.
Okay, so interesting mix, split 60-40. So most of the people on the call have applied before, but not by any stretch, a vast majority, 40% if you haven't. So that's helpful for me and Ellie to understand as we talk through the context of the awards. So with that knowledge, let's kick off and move to the next slide, please. So I wanted just to take a moment to kind of remind us about the context of these awards, why BITC runs them. So our gender equality campaign here at Business in the Community is one of our flagship areas of work, one of our longest standing areas of work, and very much focused on the idea of creating a working world where everyone can thrive regardless of gender. We're very much committed to championing inclusion for all, for taking an intersectional approach to what that means in workplaces, working environments up and down the country. We have a particular focus on the key indicators that let us know that even though we're now in 2024, we've a way to go before we can say confidently that most people in the working world are experiencing that as a place of inclusion and equality. In particular, we know there remains a gender pay gap. We know that the further up the tree you go, the fewer sort of bits of gender diversity you see, particularly lower rates of women, people of colour. We know that women are overrepresented when it comes to insecure, lower paid, more kind of fragile working experiences. And then also, as you kind of have failed to have noticed, we face a situation where people of gender minority are much more likely to report harassment, and much more likely to say they feel excluded in the workplace. I mean, there have been a number of headlines recently really highlighting the extent to which that remains kind of a persistent challenge. So our campaign exists to challenge that, to change that, to create a situation where, as I say, everybody can thrive at work. The awards are a really key part of that approach. What we seek to do with them, in sum, drive and incentivize best practice. So we're really working to encourage the people on this call, others, to really go above and beyond when it comes to championing inclusion, championing gender equity in the workplace. We really want to gain insight into what's going on, effective interventions, understand what areas are improving, what areas organisations are struggling around. That helps inform our work and the guidance that we offer our members and beyond. I think last year, applicants in total employed between them just shy of 2 million people. So this is one of the kind of most detailed looks under the bonnet of what UK PLC is doing around championing gender equity and inclusion, and it gives us just a really granular understanding of what's going on. Finally, we see these awards as a key way of supporting individual employers to enhance their practice. We know, and I'm going to share a little bit more, that employers tell us this is something they view as a kind of key vehicle for really thinking through what more they need to do, where they're working well, where they need to give more attention to. A little bit of context there, as you may be aware, each year we upgrade and review the criteria, the question set, the approach we take to assessing applications. We very much try and take a really contemporary kind of cutting edge understanding about what employers should and could be doing to champion this agenda. We have a real focus on impact. Ellie's going to talk about that in a little bit more detail, but we're always really keen to see not just the kind of initiatives, the actions, the activity that's taking place, but the end result of those, what's actually changing, whether or not employers are managing to move the needle. And finally, a bit of information, particularly for those of you who are new to this process. We assess applications anonymously. Obviously, you have to tell us who you are when you apply, but we ask that in the content of your form, you try and keep it pretty anonymous as far as possible. And we strive internally to make sure that whenever we're assessing any applicants, we don't know the details of the specific organisation. It's quite a long process internally for us at BITC, but when we get to the summer, currently scheduled for early June, we unveil the top 50 employers according to our assessment. That's featured in the Times, splashed across all of the different platforms at the Times, across our own social platforms, and we also hold a big celebratory event. Last year's was our biggest post-COVID, and we're expecting to go even bigger this coming year. So it's a really, really nice point of celebration, but also an opportunity to kind of share best practice and learn from others. So that's a bit about the context and the campaign more generally. If I was to kind of boil it down, why we think you should take part, I'm not going to spend too long on this because you've joined this call, so hopefully you're already motivated. We know that organisations that make the list tell us that they think it boosts their reputation as a sought after place to work, that it helps really demonstrate their commitment to inclusion. We know, as I say, that organisations find it a really helpful way of assessing their own approaches, their own activity. We can give you bespoke feedback. We can give you general feedback on how your application has fared in comparison to others. We also often hear, it's not always so quotable, but we often hear from organisations that internally, the knowledge that they're applying, that they're seeking to make the list, or that they might not have made the list, can really strengthen people's kind of case, as it were, for persuading organisations to do more, that it can be a really helpful kind of piece in your toolkit for influencing internal stakeholders. If we pass to the next slide, don't just take my word for it. Here are some of the stats that have come back when we've polled previous applicants. Those that have made the list, 93% say it enhances their profile. More generally, they all say that it pushes their organisation to do better, helps identify strategy. And again, those that make the list say that it really helps their organisation to attract talent. We're hearing from a number of our members at the moment that they're struggling with talent retention and recruitment, particularly around senior women, and some various other groups, and that actually being able to say you're a top 50 employer is a real badge of pride and a kind of draw card, if you like. Finally, I'm going to finish with some quotes from some of the employers that we have seen apply previously. I'm not going to read these out, but hopefully it gives you a sense of kind of the merit that we know applicants get from applying for these awards. Important tool to measure progress, valuable opportunity to benchmark. I think benchmarking comes through very, very strongly actually as a piece of feedback that we have. And those that choose to have kind of detailed feedback use it as a really great opportunity to kind of plot their plans for the year ahead. Okay, so that's quite a lot from me around kind of the context and what we're doing here. Before I hand over to Ellie, bearing in mind some 60% of you on the call have applied before, we're really interested just to understand what difference that made. Did it help? How did it help? So there should be a Slido appearing on your screen. Slido's all the rage in these sorts of events nowadays. And we wondered if you wanted just to share 1 or 2 words about the impact that applying has previously had for you, for your organisation, for your organisation's approach to championing this agenda, the inclusion agenda, more generally. Going to give you a minute there to do that because I know it can sometimes take a bit of time with Slido. Here we go. You can scan the QR code with your phone camera or go to slido.com and put in the code TT50. How are we doing? Oh, employee pride. That's a nice one to highlight. Absolutely. Really pleased to hear that. Reputation. That comes through quite strongly, actually, often. And one of the very nice things that happens to us sometimes is if we do a follow-up session with an applicant, is we can see internally how they're showcasing whether they've, when they've made the list. And really nice they're seeing some detail in terms of how it helps enhance policy initiatives, because people are able to say, look, this is what the kind of best practice employers are doing, the leading employers are doing. How can we keep pace and kind of outgrow and kind of push ahead on these? Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to leave that for 1 more minute to see what else comes through here. Keeps us focused. One of the things that we're hearing quite a lot from some of our senior stakeholders at the moment is the challenge of focusing on inclusion, DE and I more generally at a time when organisations are often kind of struggling with costs, with difficult kind of economic climate conditions. So applying for these awards can really help make sure you don't lose sight of this really, really important agenda. Okay, Jess, should we leave that for 30 seconds and then here we go. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Ellie, who is going to take you through all of this in more detail. Over to you, Ellie.
Wow, thanks, Charlotte. Lovely to see lots of names that I recognise today. I'm an inclusion advisor, so I work with lots of members on their inclusion agendas. So on to some of the practicalities of the submission and some details on how to actually go about applying for the awards. So Charlotte's told you all of the why you should apply. This is sort of giving you a bit more information on how you can actually go away and do that. So you can find the form online to apply on our website, which will also be sent in the follow-up email for this event. But it should be quite easy to find if you're so keen to get going that you want to find it immediately and have a look now or straight after the event. And here you can express your interest, and we will then send you through a unique entry link, which will give you access to your online survey via SurveyMonkey. This link is unique to you, so please don't share it any wider than your own organisation. I'm sure you won't do that anyway. But you won't need a username or a password to get into this. You just need to click the link and you'll be straight through to your application. You might be working in teams to fill this in. We would absolutely recommend that you do that. It's good to have one person sort of doing the oversight of everything and maybe writing to keep it consistent, but there should be lots of people inputting into this application. And I'll go into a bit more detail on why you should do that in a second. But please, you can share the entry link with your colleagues so that they can go in and fill bits in. But please, we would request that only one person from your organisation actually requests the link so that you can ensure that you're working on one single entry form, and we can keep track of that sort of behind the scenes as well with some of our tech wizards that look at that for us. So like I said, we'd absolutely recommend collaborating on your application with other departments, with other colleagues. So that might be your employee networks. It could be from an HR or talent management perspective. It could even be looking at external partnerships, some of your outreach programs. So I'd very much recommend working smart. So don't try to do this as one person individually, trying to find all of this information. It will take you far too long, and you probably won't get as much rich data as you might if you sort of go around and ask other people to help you with that. So please do that and pull on the people that you have at the organisation. And then finally, the deadline for submitting your application is February the 16th at 6 p.m. This is very much a hard deadline, so I would recommend getting yourself prepared as early as you can, because your future self on the 15th of February will very much appreciate that. So please do make sure that you do that. We could just go on to the next slide. So this is just a blueprint of what the application looks like in terms of the sections that we have. For old timers who've done this lots of times, this is probably very familiar to you, this slide, but you might notice that there are a few changes, and I will get into that in a little while. But for now, let's quickly run through what each of these are. So section 1 is simply some detail around who your organisation is. This doesn't count towards your score. In fact, only one of these sections actually counts towards your score. Section 2 is probably the most important part of the application. It is what we are actually scoring, and it includes 10 unique questions that cover 3 different themes that we have identified as being sort of imperative to gender equality in the workplace. The first is strategy and accountability. The second is policy and process. And then finally, we look at inclusive culture that sort of underpins all of that strategy and policy. We like to say at BITC that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So that's a really key part of your submission. Each question has a word limit of 500 words. So your submission in total will be around 5,000 words. You can go under the word limit, but please don't go over it. It's really key that you don't send us, 900 word answers. We won't read them, just as a sort of caveat to that. Assessors have done this many, many times. And we've got very good at spotting when an answer seems slightly too long. So we will check and we will make sure we don't read over that word limit to ensure that it's fair for everyone who's participating. Also, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you a higher score. Sometimes the best answers are those that keep it really clear and really concise and tell us a really sort of clear narrative throughout. Section 3 is all about employee experience. This was introduced a few years ago to ensure that we can sort of verify lived experience from your employees at your organisation. So what we'll ask you to do here is to share contact details with their permission, of course, of around 4 employees that we can directly contact so that we can hear from your workforce. And then finally, section 4 is some key demographic information and data monitoring that we'd like from you, and some tick box questions for you to answer as well. And this will really support us in the analysis of our trends. So whilst it doesn't count towards the score in terms of our insights report at the end, it will give us a really clear picture of sort of the state of gender equity in the UK across organisations. And you play a key part in giving us this. So we thank you in advance for sharing that with us. If we go on to the next slide, and I appreciate I'm whizzing through this quite quickly, but there will be time for some questions as well. But just some key information on the awards themselves. So applications, as I've mentioned, close on February the 16th. In terms of costs, this is a free resource, so it's totally free to apply. And I say resource because it is so much more than just an awards. It's a fantastic benchmarking tool, as Charlotte mentioned. It's a real opportunity to dive deeper into what your organisation is doing for gender inclusion across the board. But also to sort of reflect internally on what more you could be doing, what your priorities are, and to give you sort of a clear action plan to move forward with. So do think of it as sort of a free resource rather than it just being something that you submit and don't look at again. It's very much a great tool that you can use that's at your fingertips. If you do make the list, there is a promotional fee of around £2,500 to appear in the Times supplement. You've also got the option to add additional logo licensing costs, but if you have any questions on that, do send them through or drop us an email, and we'd be happy to answer those for you. In terms of feedback, so another free resource for everyone is that anyone who applies, whether you make the list or not, is able to access a personalised trends analysis report, which will essentially show you how your individual scores for each question compare to those who made the list that year. So every applicant has the opportunity to see that, which is a fantastic opportunity for you to be able to sort of understand where you sit in comparison with your competitors, but also with sort of the rest of the UK. And of course, you can also access the Times Top 50 Insights report on our website, whether you apply or not. And we'd recommend everyone read that regardless. You also have the option for enhanced feedback, which we would absolutely encourage that you make the most of. It's really, really valuable. And there are people on the call that I have delivered enhanced feedback to who I know have found it helpful and have used that going forward in order to sort of drive their agendas and decide what their next step is and what their priorities are. And this essentially is a more detailed report. So we'll be going into the why you scored the way that you did for certain questions, and the how as to how you might improve your practices. We'll also share examples of best practice of what organisations flagged to us throughout. And we'll also give you tips if you wanted to apply the following year on how better to submit your application. So even if you make the list, we'll give both constructive feedback and also the sort of positives of your application as well. These are delivered by our expert inclusion advisors, so a really fantastic opportunity to draw on some expertise from people who have worked in the field for quite a long time and who have lots of great knowledge. For members with a gender advisory package, lucky you, this is free. You're able to access this from your advisor, so do just reach out about that. For those with an inclusion package more broadly, so if you have a race package like a race championship, for example, or an inclusion championship or a race core package, this is, you can use your advisory time for this. So it's either half a day of your advisory time or it's a fee of £473 plus VAT. And then finally, for those of you who aren't members or you don't have inclusion advisory support, this is at a cost of £945 plus VAT. It's very much worth every penny. Many of our members find this invaluable to setting their agendas when it comes to gender inclusion. One of my members described it as BITC being the gift that keeps on giving when we gave this feedback to them. So make sure that you do access that, as it really makes the most of your hard work that you put into the application. So if you're going to spend hours on the application, you might as well then also spend a bit more time understanding where you could improve. So if we go on to the next slide, whilst we run this as an annual award, it's very much not static, and we're very much proud of that as well. We upgrade and enhance the awards every year according to sort of contemporary knowledge and insight. So every year we shift our criteria, sometimes quite significantly, and sometimes in smaller ways. And we're very much proud of the fact that we do this and that we keep up to date. We want to be dynamic, we want to be evolving, pushing the envelope. And it's a key thing that makes Times Top 50 stand out from other awards. We are not static at all. We really do spend a lot of time reviewing how we can improve it for everybody involved. A clear example of this sort of ability to pivot is that if you have been with us for a while doing this, you'll know that we changed the name of Times Top 50 from Times Top 50 to women for women to Times Top 50 for gender equality a few years ago, to sort of reflect the fact that this needed to be more inclusive of people of all genders, but also that gender equality is everybody's problem, and actually we need to establish a more gender equal world to have a better world for everyone. So what changes have we made this year? The first thing is an introduction of a very specific sexual harassment question. So we've made this more explicit. It's something we've always talked about, but it's very much explicit this year. And this is, we've elevated the focus on this to line up with sort of recent events. So we want to see here action to prevent, address, and respond to incidences specifically of sexual harassment. So a very, very specific question there. We have removed the case study this year. So for those who've applied before, or for those who haven't seen this, we used to have a case study at the end on a specific topic. We've done this to sort of reflect the desiring to have as much consistency as possible and to streamline the application process, particularly as we seem to get a record number of applicants every year. So we really want to do a clear like-for-like comparison between applications. So we've made the decision to remove the case study this year. We've also removed dedicated focus on intersectionality. So we had a question that was specifically around intersectional inclusion last year. This year, we're mainstreaming that across the piece. This is very much a trend at BITC and also at a lot of our member organisations to ensure that intersectionality is woven throughout everything that we do. So we're very much taking that approach within our questions. So please do keep that in mind when you're writing your answers. It's very critical that you include that in most of your answers. We will be looking out for it as assessors as well. So if we go on to the next slide, I'll go through this very, very quickly. General good practice for your submissions. I'll run through a few different tips. I've assessed for a few years now. I know we have advisors on the call who will have as well, and they might want to pop some tips in the chat if there's anything on here that they think of that's not included. So it obviously goes without saying, please do read the instructions. Please read the guidance notes really, really carefully. And do answer the questions in full. We'll have given you sort of some guidance on how to answer, and we will be looking for those extra bits that we outline. If you are confused about any questions, please just contact us. We're there to help, and that's what we're here for. So please do that. This goes without saying, but actually is something that sometimes people struggle with. So we really want to maintain a focus on gender equity and gender inclusion throughout the piece. Whilst you will probably have some really fantastic work going on in the broader inclusion space, we do want to try and sort of link that back to gender and its intersections as well. Do cover off both solid good practice that you've told us about before, and then innovation as well. And we want to hear it all. So what's different at your organization that's really pushing the boat out? How are you thinking outside of the box? We saw some amazing examples last year. And if you aren't sure what that might look like, do take a look at our insights report from last year, because that will give you a good idea of some of the really innovative ways that people were tackling this. We can't say it enough. Charlotte's already mentioned it. Please do make sure that you are addressing the impact element of the question as robustly as you can. We'll be asking and looking for quantitative analysis and qualitative impact. And there are questions, as a sort of hint from me, that will ask you very specifically to focus on impact. If it says that, please do make sure to include as much impact as you can get, because we really will be looking at it. The other thing we've done this year is that we have added in sort of a timeline for impact. So we want to see at least 2 years of progress where possible. So, you know, if an initiative's only been around for a year, then that's not quite possible to do that. But we would like to see that 2 years as a minimum for most things. I've talked about intersectionality, so I won't go over that again because I know we have lots of time, but please do think about that. Please think about sustainability. How are these measures going to last? How will you measure that they're impactful as well to ensure they're sustainable? And then finally, we want to know what your accountability measures are. So even if we don't ask about it specifically, it's always really great for us to hear what accountability measures are in place so that we know this is being taken as seriously as possible, that it's being monitored, etc. Do tell us a story. It really helps when we're reading the answers to have a narrative. So tell us the what, then the why, then the how, and then the impact that is made with evidence to support. And you can't really go wrong with that formula. So do tell us a story. That will really help with your when you're submitting your answers. And then finally, like we said before, please do draw on people across your organisation, particularly for the qualitative feedback piece, because you might get some really great insights there that you can include in your answers. And then very quickly, finally from me, just a checklist before you submit. So before you do finally submit your entry, do ensure that you've completed all the mandatory sections, including the data monitoring sections. Just go over that and make sure it's all there. Do make sure you've completed your contact details form as well for the person who you want to be your main point of contact for this. Make sure that you provide your organisation name as you would want it to appear in any promotions around the top 50 list with the Times. And then finally, please do check that all of your answers are anonymous. Don't include your organisation's name or references that would easily identify it. We want this to be anonymised as much as we possibly can. We don't want our assessors to be able to figure out who anyone is, to make it as fair and consistent as possible. If you're doing it in a Word document, you could just Control F and type the name in of your organisation just to make sure that that's not there. And that is everything from me, I think. So I'm going to hand back over to Charlotte now to introduce the next section.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Lots of detail there. Really, really pleased to hear it. I think that has probably given people almost as much as they need, but I can see that a few questions have come through. So what we're going to do now, it's 11:30, is we're going to take a few minutes with me and Ellie answering and addressing any questions, and also our colleagues popping any thoughts in the dialogue box before I turn to our guest speaker, Laura. So let's just have a look at what's come through. If you've got any other questions, do pop them in there. So let's just bring them up. So a few queries about costs. So as we say, it's free to apply. It's free to access your kind of trends analysis report. If you make the top 50 and you wish us to showcase that and promote it in our partnership with the Times, we do ask that you contribute to the promotional cost. So it is £2,500 to appear on the list and to be promoted by ourselves and the Times. So I hope that's clear and has kind of clarified and answered that question. Then we've had a question, I hope you don't mind me naming you. We've had a question from, oh, here we go, Cassia. Is that in relation to what I just said? Please jump on.
Just a question about the £2,500 fee. Is that one-off fee?
Just a one-off fee, and it means that for the year ahead, we showcase you as a top 50 employer, and we promote you in our partnership with the Times and across the I2C platforms. Great. Okay. Jill, who we've got on the call, don't mind me just using your first name there. You've asked a couple of questions there. I'm going to try and answer them with Ellie, but I also think I'd invite any other previous applicants to jump in here, put your hand up or put anything on the dialogue box, and we will also come to it with Laura later. So doing it for the first time, a couple of practical questions. How much time did your entry take? So Ellie and I discussed this the other day. We hear different things from different organisations. It partly depends on the size, depends on how familiar you are with your data, how used you are to gathering this. We would say in the conversation that we had that we think it's unusual for it not to take at least the equivalent of kind of 3 working days. Ellie, is that a fair sort of assessment of what we said? We don't ask this specific detail, but that's roughly what we think is often what we hear. But if you're somebody else on the call who's applied and you want to share something about how your organisation, the duration, how involved it is, please do jump in on that chat or put your hand up. I can see we've got Ingrid. Please go for it.
Hi, thank you. A quick question. Obviously, there's a lot of participants on this call. How do you know if you are from a large organisation that there isn't somebody else on the same call from a different part of the business, from the same organisation?
So we have to trust to your internal organisation that you have a degree of kind of awareness and coordination around if your organisation is intending on applying. Typically, not exclusively, it tends to be either an HR function, a talent function, a people and culture function that acts as the kind of central coordinating space around things like these awards. So if you think there's a possibility that somebody else in your organization might be thinking about applying, do connect with them internally. We don't offer a kind of service of us saying, hey, we should let you know that lots and lots of people have applied from Joe Blogg's organization. We ask you to kind of manage that. It's unlikely to happen, though. I would say I'm not aware of that having happened previously.
Okay. It was just I didn't know if I'm doing the same application and somebody else is doing it, just because there's multiple business lines within the same organization. So it could be that I'm representing one business line, but if we go to group level, then it might be worth trying to reconnect people from the same organization.
If you're particularly concerned, do feel free to drop us an email, and I'm sure we can find a way through to support you and let you know. Yeah, we'd be really happy to do that. We're also mindful of the fact that different organisations approach it differently. So some don't necessarily want all of their internal stakeholders to know that they're applying. Certainly, so when you apply, we ask you to list very clearly who your contact detail is and who you want us to engage with. We take confidentiality really, really seriously. So we make sure that if you apply from your organisation, I won't tell somebody else in your organisation unless we've kind of had permission, if you see what I mean. So we kind of manage that quite judiciously.
Okay.
Just on that timing point, we've had somebody who's put in this in the dialogue. I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce your name correctly, Monathahaha. Would you like to come on and just read out what you said there? Because that's quite helpful, I think, for others to see around how you've approached it. If you don't pop up, I'll read out your answer. Not popping up. So this person says, a shared Word doc has worked well with us. Normally we set up an initial conversation with teams involved, discuss timelines for reviews, and then everyone goes in to add their info to the shared Word doc. Time to complete can vary depending on capacity between teams and how many layers of reviews you need to have before submitting. So we know that organisations often have quite a kind of sign-off process that they have to go through when they're sharing this data externally. So you need to kind of factor that in. So that was Jill's question, and others are obviously interested around duration. What approach did you take to completion? I think we're going to come up with that with Laura shortly around an editable Word doc and asking relevant people to go in. So you can see there, Jill, hopefully that's answered that question exactly as you guessed, is how one of the others on the call has shared they do that. You've mentioned there, Jill, also a query around our partnership with the Times in the context of this being an awards that champions gender equity, and the knowledge that some have hesitations around the Times' kind of editorial position around these issues. What I would encourage you to do is to share two things. One, to label very explicitly that BITC takes a trans-inclusive approach to championing gender equality. As Ellie mentioned earlier, we changed the name and revised our criteria to make sure that we were really taking a contemporary and inclusive approach, recognising that a number of different genders can be minoritised, and that when we're championing gender equality, we need to recognise that. So I would really kind of, hopefully that offers some comfort. The second thing I would say is that at the end of any application process, we always ask our applicants for any feedback, and we feed that into how we approach the following year, not only in terms of kind of systems and processes, but partnerships, organisations who we align with. And if there are things that you'd like to share with us, we're always open to kind of feedback. So there will be an opportunity for you to share any kind of thoughts or perspectives that you have around our partnerships there. I hope that answers. Okay, what else have we had come through? When do you have to pay the cash? So you have to pay the cash when we tell you you've made the list. That's when you have to pay the cash. And then if you want to have that enhanced feedback beyond what we offer as standard and free, that can be according to the timetable that you and us set together. Do you have any statistics on the amount of people who read the list, click-through rates? Certainly we can share that. I think a fair amount of it is in the guidance notes, but we can definitely follow up with a bit more information around that. I'm not going to kind of read out the stats now, but one of the things that we work with partners around is making sure that this gets suitable kind of buzzing profile. Here we go. Emily said there, you'll receive a link to the pricing document with a bit more information there. Somebody shared 5 working days. I'm going to kind of run through these final questions before coming to you, Laura, just to kind of put you on notice there. How many people do you need to feed into it? 5 working days, and spend some time on making sure the data is right. How many applications do you get each year? The million-dollar question. So we don't release the specific number of applicants that we get each year, but I can say that for the last 4 years in a row, we've had an increase in the number of applicants. So we're very hopeful that we'll see that this year as well. Hopefully myself and Ellie have done a good job of saying very clearly, it's fantastic to make the list. It's a brilliant thing to achieve, particularly in the context of competition. But the process of applying, the support we're able to offer you, the insights that you receive on your application more generally, in and of itself mean that we think of these awards as being a really, really useful exercise to go through, whether you make that list or not. So I hope that's kind of landed. Okay. I think we've had a few things come through there that have been answered in the question. Brilliant. Okay. I would say it takes a lot longer than 3 days. It's a very intense process over several weeks, but so worth it. Fair point. Thank you for sharing that, Anita. As I say, Ellie and I were kind of speculating, and we think it really does depend on size, the way your organisation is structured, how you do it. So I think it's a bit how long is a piece of string, but it's definitely not. It's not a coffee break whiz through. It's something that takes a substantive amount of time. Okay. I think that's all of those questions. Ellie, is there anything you wanted to add to what I've shared there?
No, I did put just a tip in the chat about how to save yourself a bit of time. And I'm going to say it here just in case anyone missed it, because I think it's quite important. But the way that we assess is that assessors won't mark a whole application. We will be given certain questions to mark. So for example, I might mark all of question 9. So I won't see if you have included something in question 1 that could also be included in question 9. So do feel free to repeat yourselves. And actually, sometimes people don't, and they might need to put that information in another question and it gets omitted because they think it's been read elsewhere. So do repeat yourself. If something's relevant to 2 questions and it's really important for both and you want to copy and paste it, we won't even know that you've copied and pasted it. Equally, do share as much as you can, but that would save you a bit of time. I would just, that gives you an idea on how we actually mark it. So.
Thanks, Ellie. So we made the decision to be quite open about this because we did have a bit of feedback of people saying, but I shared X, Y, Z elsewhere, and I thought that would be taken into consideration. The process we follow is that we have exactly as Ellie says, individual questions scored by a pair of assessors. So they'll see everybody's application, what their detail on flexible working, for example, is, which in a way is partly why BITC is such an invaluable resource if you want to join us and access our kind of content and our membership, because we have just so much in-house knowledge. Okay, I'm going to pivot now to inviting Laura to join me here on screen for a bit of a conversation directly. Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for joining us. So
Hi.
Laura is UK Employee Relations Diversity and Inclusion Advisor from Shell, who have regularly made the list in the past. And she has very kindly agreed to kind of have a conversation with me about the kind of the why and the how and the impact. And hopefully this will be of use for everybody on the call. Before I kind of turn to you, Laura, I just want to say a big thank you. I know that sort of appearing and talking on this can sometimes feel like there's a bit of a bar, because are you sort of putting yourself up as best practice and we know everything? And that's very much not the case. So we're really, really delighted that Laura's happy to appear, and we're not positioning you as knowing everything, but you're just going to share your experiences and perspectives. That's right, isn't it, Laura?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm just going to get it so I can actually see you. Or maybe we could take the slides down now, Jess. Here we go. So we went through a few questions that we were going to run through. So shall I just kick off with those, or is there anything you'd like to say before we do that?
Yeah, let's just get into it.
Okay, so the first thing that we thought it would be helpful for our attendants to hear is, why do you choose to apply? What are the kind of benefits you've seen, and how has it helped you in kind of championing gender and inclusion at Shell?
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. And I think for context, as you mentioned, Shell has been applying for the Times Top 50 for over a decade now. And I think we've been included in the annual rankings for about 13 of the previous 15 years. So we see huge benefit in applying, which is why we reapply every year. And I think really our aim is to demonstrate our commitment to gender equality and really showcase and celebrate the initiatives and programs that we do have in place. So we've seen benefits internally and externally. When we look externally, it has really helped us attract diverse talent. I think a data source from 2022, around 55% of our incoming graduate hires were actually female, and this exceeded our 50% target that we have every year. And we have seen that increasing. And what we do is we do utilize our Times Top 50 recognition at that recruitment stage. As we said, we're really proud of it. And we have received direct positive feedback from applicants on that recognition, saying, we didn't know you were recognized in this, really great to see, and different types of comments like that. And we do prioritize this. So I myself last year upskilled our resourcing team on the Times Top 50. What is it? We provided them with a talking crib sheet so that it was mentioned again at that recruitment stage, and we could see the real benefit at that point. And as I've said, the recognition really can make a difference. I was reading a study online that stated 67% of millennials and Generation Z employees value diversity when considering employment opportunities. So it really could make that difference on whether someone applies or not. And then also looking internally. So again, quite a lot of what people were actually saying earlier is what we at Shell has also seen. Last year, when we were recognized, we decided to host a big fair at all our locations in the UK, really celebrating that we'd been listed and providing it as an opportunity to share, look at all of these amazing policies and initiatives that we had. And it really did instill a sense of pride within our employees, a sense of awareness and education for some employees that weren't actually aware. And after that fair, we did receive a lot of people saying, oh, I'll have a look at that policy, or I didn't know that network existed. I'm really keen to join. But also it provided that opportunity to really reflect. Where are we? Where do we need to go? That fair was a real opportunity to engage with our employees on how they feel. And I think this is a real value of applying for the Times Top 50 every year, holding ourselves account, and particularly in such a large organization like Shell, actually coming together. So the policy and benefits team, the recruitment team, all coming together and saying, look, what have we achieved? What is the data? What's been the impact? And actually collating that into one story is really helpful for us whilst doing the submission.
That's really, really helpful, Laura. Thank you. What a kind of expansive sense of how it plays out for you internally. That's really, really nice to hear. Pivoting away from kind of the why and the kind of impact there, I wondered if you could share a bit about the process that you follow when it comes to applying. Kind of, we heard some questions there around what has worked best. Is it a shared Word document? Is it one person holding the pen? How do you do it?
Yeah, so I'm sure it's totally different for everyone. Here at Shell, what we find best is that one person leads it. So last year, I was the one who led it. Having one sort of lead who manages it from start to finish, is responsible for the time management and ensuring that it's submitted on time. And if you are the lead, I would highly recommend, having organization, that discipline. I know here, we start as soon as it comes out, we start planning and organizing, engaging with the key stakeholders who will need. So for example, here we need 2 sign-offs from my line manager and then the line manager plus 1. And an email is shared with them start of January. Look, this is the Times Top 50, reminding them why it's so important and crucial. So that prioritization is already set right at the start. And then just explaining, look, we'll be sending you the draft on this date. We'll need it reviewed and edited by this date so we can submit it here. And just having that real plan is really helpful at the start, and I'd really encourage that. But then, as people have said, not one person should be completing the whole submission. It will take too long, and actually you won't have most of the data yourself. So really using the relevant teams. Here, we don't use a shared Word document. Sometimes we find it gets a bit too busy and complicated that way. So the lead, who is me this year, I have reached out to all those relevant teams. So I'm understanding where we'll need the data for each question. So I know one, for example, is based on recruitment. So I've reached out to our resourcing team, spoken to them about the question, discussed it. Look, we're going to need this piece of evidence, qualitative and quantitative, and they now have a set date to share that back, and they are working with it within their internal teams. And I think this is really beneficial, just delegating those questions, using your resources, using the teams that has all that knowledge and data to really receive that information.
Brilliant, thank you. And great to hear you've already kind of got out of the gate. You don't have to wait till you've had your application form. The guidance notes include all of the questions, so everybody can see them. Pivoting to one of the areas that Ellie and I talked about was around showing impact, showing kind of what change has been achieved as a result of the kind of work underway. Could you tell us a bit about how you measure impact at Shell?
Sure. So I think when I look at the submission, it's similar to what we've said as well, making sure that you've planned out, where you gather that data from, whether it be in the recruitment team, the data sources there, or the policy team. At Shell, for quantitative data, we have quite a lot of dashboards. So we use Power BI here, and we have a Powering Lives for HR, which displays quite a lot of our representation levels, for example. Self-ID is noted on there, and there's a lot of quantitative data there. But then also recognizing, our policy team, they have their own dashboard, which measures, different policies and D&I uptake in each of them. And I have quite a detailed planned map of exactly where I will go for my data and impact points. But also the qualitative data, which I think is just as important as the quantitative and can sometimes be overlooked. But for that, again, just using as many diverse sources as possible. So for us at Shell, a lot is with our employee networks that we work very closely with, particularly that gender balance. But also we have Viva Engage, which is a bit like Facebook, where a lot of employee voice is heard and people share different comments. But I really think when you're planning that impact, I think what's really useful is try and go to as many diverse channels as possible, the different businesses, the different seniorities, and really try and engage that different voice and data point, I think will be really beneficial as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So before I ask you for kind of one final piece of advice that's been super helpful, Laura, I just wanted to flag that I think we've got another person on the call who kindly said they could pop up and share a bit about their experience. I believe we've got, apologies, I don't know if it's Sarah or Sarah Goff from Sage. So I'll be coming to you in a second to kind of share your perspective. But Laura, having shared all of that and bearing in mind that Shell is obviously a particularly specific kind of organisation, some of the other applicants are also ginormous and global, but some of them aren't. What's one piece of advice you'd give to kind of an applicant?
Yeah, and I think I was thinking about this, and I think I might go quite simple, and I just reflected on it, but it's don't overlook that qualitative feedback. I think in previous years, what we've done at Shell is really focused on the quantitative. Let's get that objective data to show that increase. And yes, that is great and fantastic, but actually including that employee voice, that qualitative feedback will really help the assessor understand your organization, the journey that you've been on, and how employees are really feeling about whether it be an initiative or your line managers. So I would just say, remember the value of that qualitative feedback and make sure you're including that.
That's really, really helpful to hear. Thank you so much. As you say, it's a kind of a quote or a comment can be very, very powerful, can't it? All right. Well, thank you so much, Laura. I don't know if we do we have Sarah here from Sage?
Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Sorry, technical issues, as always.
There we go. So I know my colleague Emily had a bit of a chat with you, and you said you'd be happy to share a bit about the approach that your organisation takes. Could you tell us a bit about your perspective on the Times.50, the why, the how, and kind of any impact that kind of applications have had for you?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, so last year was the first year that Sage as an organisation applied for the Times.50, so it was very new to us. And even, to be honest, listening to this call today, I've got loads of more great tips to take back for this year's submission. Really, when I think about kind of the why, I feel like I'm really going to echo kind of what Laura said and what was said at the start of the call, which is, to be honest, it was mostly for us to benchmark our progress. You know, again, we're nowhere near the size of Shell, but we are, you know, we are across, you know, kind of, we're a global organization, and sometimes as a DEI team, we don't always think we're doing as well as we are, and it's, you know, it's really, really helpful for us to kind of bring everything together and go, actually, this is what we're doing, this is the impact that we're making, when sometimes it helps you kind of take a little bit of a step back from things, if that makes sense. So it's really, really useful from that perspective. I think it's also really kind of helped from like a, you know, we really wanted to make sure that our leaders were getting involved in what we were doing kind of around the business. So all those kind of particular owners, I guess you'd call them, for each of those different sections, actually, because we went to them and said, right, we're doing this submission, but ultimately you need to own this question, not us. Actually, that really helped them to go, wait, what are we doing? And going through that process, really thinking about what they're doing and what they're not doing, has helped them clarify again, like, what they can do in the future. What does that look like? So yes, that was kind of a bit of our why. And then from a how perspective, again, we took quite a structured approach. We're a small kind of team, but our kind of global DI director was the lead for our submission. We created a whole team site. We, rather than have like a one shared Word document, we decided, because we'd seen in the guidance that actually every question was marked potentially by someone else, we had a question per Word document that we would then share with those relevant owners so they could fill it out without necessarily kind of being influenced by what someone else had written as well. And I think another thing that we also really found useful was we gave all of those kind of owners, like, you know, we had a call with them, we had here are the timelines, we gave them a structure of, rightly or wrongly, like what we wanted them to talk about. So, you know, what is that? What have you done? Why have you done it? What's the impact actually, and what are you going to do next as well? Not that we necessarily use that next steps information, but it helped them think about, actually, we're not just filling this in for the submission, but also to think about the changes that they're going to make after we've done this submission as well. So it wasn't just like oh, we've come to you about this and we'll never speak to you about this work again. It's how can they start to think about taking that work into their part of the business. And I think the other thing we found really useful, which again I know has been talked about already, I feel like I'm repeating everything that's been said, was the review kind of element, where we really found that we basically went out to the business and found people that were not involved in what we were doing at all and got them to review it, and went, just review this with no context, because we wanted it to be easy to understand for the assessors, and we wanted to make sure that we'd got that kind of really clear story around what we've done, why we've done it, what the impact was as well. And I should definitely add, I think that all the comments around, oh, it takes a couple of days. No, it definitely took us way longer than we thought it would do. Like, really, really worthwhile, I should say. So yeah, that's probably a bit of a kind of story from us.
That's just been incredibly helpful. Thank you so much, and not at all repetitive, just hearing another person's perspective. Obviously there's some overlap there, but really, really helpful to hear kind of different ways of doing it. So thank you so much to both of our kind of delegate speakers there, Laura and Sarah, for sharing a bit about how your organisation approach it. And you can hear that, you know, Laura mentioned that Shell has applied a number of years and been successful for a number of occasions, whereas Sage, they were first-time applicants last year. So you can kind of see there's a variety there. I should also mention, we see a wide range of sectors apply, a wide range of organisations. It is not exclusively global companies. We see smaller organisations apply, some city, some not, utility, public sector. I think we've got on the call last year, we had Hachette, the publishing house, made the list, and they appeared at our celebration event and did a barnstorming job. So a real variety of voices there, but really, really helpful to hear from two in particular about how their organisations approach it and the impact they've had. So thank you so much to both of you. Okay, so we're coming up towards the end of this session. I'm going to invite Ellie back on the call and say in a minute if you've got any last sort of remarks that you'd like to make to leave with delegates. I think there's a few more kind of comments have come through in the chat, but they seem to have been answered. And thank you very much to my colleague Veronica, who's added another top tip about when you apply, making sure you talk about your DE&I interventions policies, strategies. Don't just talk about DE&I overall, but specifically about gender and gender equality, and you apply that intersectional lens and the impact of your work. Hopefully that's all been helpful. Any final remarks from yourself, Ellie?
Nothing, no tips to add, but just good luck to everyone who's thinking of applying. If you're not sure, we would really encourage you to just go for it. You'll get feedback regardless in some form. So do pull on your advisors as well if you have one, and do use the inbox if you're struggling or you have any questions. We'd be happy to answer those and to help you with that. So yeah, just good luck to everybody, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Really, really lovely to have you with us today. So as I run through our final slide, a poll is going to appear on your screen asking how useful you found today's session. We, like everybody else, like to review our events, and we're always keen to improve. So there should also be space if you've got any sort of reflections or comments you wanted to share. Whilst you do that, I'm just going to do a little bit of a BITC shout out, a bit of a BITC advert. So if you're not yet a member and you're thinking about joining us, or indeed if you are a member, to remind you of some of the things that are available, and many of these are actually available to non-members as well, so we're not too jealously guarded about things. So we have our bespoke advisory services. Ellie is one of the leading lights there, designed to support you with a number of different products, materials, services, events to help you in championing this agenda around gender, but also intersectionally across the piece. We cover a wide range of kind of identities and kind of lenses around really creating inclusive working cultures. If you're interested in kind of networking with people in your region, in some of your specific locales, we can connect you, we can support you with that. We have a very heavy presence in a number of regional places of interest, and so we're really, really keen to work with organisations through those sort of areas. Specific to Time Stop 50, there's a wealth of content on our website. So the application guidance notes, the FAQs, you can see last year's insights report, which was the kind of general sort of analysis that we did of applicants. Really, really encourage you to have a look at all of those if you're interested. We run a whole suite of events, and we've flagged a few of those here. Future Focus from menstruation to menopause. We've got an International Women's Day event coming up, as you would expect. One thing that isn't mentioned on here that I just thought I would take a moment is you'll be seeing in the headlines quite a lot of discussion at the moment around parental leave. There's a lot of discussion on LinkedIn around shifts in terms of supporting what are commonly called kind of secondary parents, non-birthing parents, dads. We have an enormous amount of bespoke kind of specific guidance that we can give you if you're thinking about enhancing your parental leave policy, if you're thinking about reaching for that North Star of equal parental leave. The information is available on our website, or just drop us a line. Indeed, we can even help you calculate the costs if you were to reach for that North Star of equal parental leave. A hard thing for many organisations to do, but we can really help you on that journey. And then finally, of course, we've included a link there around how to apply. The kind of page on our website where you can find out how to get that link. So without further ado, thank you so much for coming along today. Best of luck if you do indeed decide to apply. We very much hope you will. Remember, this is not just about the awards, it's about the whole process. And remember that, yes, it's 2024. Hopefully we're all going to have a positive new year, but there is more to be done. There's further we can go. We've got a wealth of a journey ahead of us around creating truly inclusive working cultures. And I know that a number of the people on the call are really at the vanguard of making that happen. So thank you for everything that you do. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks very much.